Well, hello again, Charlotte. It's great to talk to you again in one of these sort of short interview type videos. For anyone who's watching who doesn't know, I'm Tim Guest from Consulting 51, management consultant very loosely, joined by Charlotte Braithwaite, psychotherapist and coach. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you for having me.
Now today's video, something that sort of come to mind recently. We are, dare I say it, back to normal, more or less. People are in work. Most people are. People are meeting friends and family in pubs and nights out. We're allowed into groups more than six, and people are now talking sort of about their experiences of the pandemic, of their ongoing experiences and tragedies that might have befallen them, and various other things. And what sort of struck me is how people are maybe can do some work on their listening skills, whether they're an employer dealing with an employee, whether you're a colleague, whether you're someone's friend, a husband, a wife, or a parent. So pretty much anyone really. And I think, and we can all be guilty of this, someone comes to you with their problem or their challenge, and you try and be sort of helpful and sort of empathize. Oh yeah, that happened to me, and you'll be fine or whatever else. And it's not terribly helpful. But what sort of tips have you got from your psychotherapy point of view to help people be better listeners?
It's when you asked me to do this talk, I was thinking is listening is a topic that seems very straightforward, but actually we're never really taught how to listen.
Yeah.
And I think many people experience it as a passive activity, whereas certainly in my training, it's something that you very proactively get trained in.
It's kind of your line of work, isn't it? Listening to people.
Absolutely. And I think that exactly as you alluded to, I think listening is actually, it's sometimes quite an uncomfortable activity to listen, because we are often evoked, our own emotions perhaps, or our own responses, our own traumas, our own difficulties. And I think sometimes people's rush to empathize is in part to bypass whatever difficult stuff gets triggered in the listener. So when we talk about actually the first sort of foundational art of listening, I think is being self-aware.
Yep.
And that we don't just listen with our ears. I think a lot of the time people listen with their minds. They're thinking about what they want to say in response, rather than really taking it in.
It's almost like they're waiting for their turn to speak sometimes. So, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But listening really, as a therapist, is a whole body experience. I'm listening not just with my ears. I'm listening. How does that make me feel?
Okay.
How does the person sound? There's a real curiosity as I'm listening, rather than just what should I say next. And I think that's where people get caught.
Okay, and so if someone is coming to you as, let's say we're dealing with employers now, and an employee has had a particularly tough time with a relative or whatever else, and they're going through what's happened to them, how can the employer sort of practice good listening? What sort of techniques can you help them with?
I think really allowing space for the person to say everything of that part before responding.
Okay.
We're not so practiced necessarily at pausing, just allowing a little bit of space when someone's finished talking. We're kind of like waiting to jump in, or to say, no, is that everything you'd like to share? Sometimes asking the question, especially more in an employer position. I do think as well, though, there's something in the therapeutic relationship, but certainly I think is applicable to anyone that you're engaged in a conversation with, is to what we call mirror.
Okay.
Back to a person. So pretty much to validate what I've just heard you say.
Okay.
So it sounds like it was really tough when that happened. The when you had that meeting, that was a really difficult, awkward conversation, wasn't it?
Okay.
So pretty much sort of mirror what somebody's just said as a way of validating I have heard you.
Yeah.
That as a fundamental just helps people feel seen and heard, which is ultimately what we want from a sharing experience anyway.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, if I think back to when I've talked to people and wanted to sort of talk about something that's affecting me, sometimes I'm not looking for that kind of empathy and for advice. I'm just looking to talk to someone. So what advice can you give? Let's say, obviously we've all got friends and family and things. How can we sort of stop that urge to sort of rush to sort of empathise? And yes, I had a similar experience. And how can we sort of get some tips around that?
To be super crude and super practical about it, if I think sort of the methodology of it, of ask them one question about their experience before you start sharing your own.
Right. Okay.
Because I think that it's human nature. We want to connect, and sometimes we're really pleased that someone shared their experience, because I've been waiting to be validated in my experience, and so there's sort of with good intention, they're rushing to, oh, I understand.
Yeah, I think, I see.
Rather, what happens is I then make the conversation about me.
Yeah, I think we've all seen that happen many times, where you go in with something and then they turn it around, and then all of a sudden it's their experience. And also, if that person's experience was quite an emotional one as well, it can kind of draw them in, and it's sort of, oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a big deal to share how you're feeling or what you've gone through. For some people, that takes a lot of courage in of itself.
Okay.
So then it can almost, the risk is it then kind of revalidates that there's no point in resharing something because it's always about somebody else's experience. Yeah. So that can come up too. But I think when we ask questions, or we say, how are you feeling now about it?
Yeah.
Or, so what did you do after that?
Okay.
So it doesn't even have to be, super in-depth conversations, but when we show interest in what someone has just said, rather than assuming we must know the story because we've been through something similar.
And then telling our story as well. So, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think sometimes people sort of rush to do that is because it can be, I mean, particularly you can see in your line of work, if you're listening to people tell you about their problems and their challenges and things, do you think maybe some people's defense mechanism, because if they feel if they are listening too much, then they might be taking on that other person's problems, and if they've had 3 friends they talked to that day, they're dealing with John's divorce, Miriam's redundancy, and all that sort of thing. So how can people sort of avoid taking on the mental baggage of colleagues, employees, friends?
It's a really tricky one, Tim, and I think this is in part why therapeutic training is so extensive, because we are energetic beings, and we have a multitude of different ways that we try and protect ourselves, but might end up making things more difficult, or just having a challenging experience, or putting the other person off from sharing. I think that you said something really important earlier. Sometimes people are sharing just to have put it out there. And I think that when we realise actually so much of what we can do to support someone is just to hold space for them.
Okay.
And to be a witness. That's all a lot of the time we actually can do.
Yeah.
But that makes us feel a bit helpless. We like to be fixers.
Yeah.
So it's for me there's 2 parts. Being a witness is enough.
Okay.
And just being aware of, if it feels like I'm taking something on, that self-awareness really comes in handy, because then I can, what we call disidentify, which is, okay, I'm feeling these feelings, but they didn't start with me.
Yep.
And what do I need to do to sort of energetically shift them?
Okay.
But for some people, it might be, I know a colleague of mine actually who washes their hands.
Right.
And a sort of a ritual.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Way of like, I'm quite literally washing this off me.
Okay.
Something that's embodied can help. But I think as well, when you're talking about validating for someone, sort of being heard and having listened to, there's a golden question that if I'm supporting someone, whether that be a leader, an employer, or a client who's also wanting to work on their listening skills, simply asking the question, what does support look like right now?
That's very interesting, because you're right, it's different for everyone. Let's take grief for example. Someone might literally want want nothing, just someone to talk to. Someone might want advice and everything else, and it's very, yeah, it's very interesting you say that. And just going back to your point then about sort of listening, and often that's all we can do. If I've had a couple of friends recently who've lost parents, which has been quite traumatic, and there's nothing you can say that's going to bring them back or make it any better. And often people will try and say comments or things just to try and make someone feel better. But I think, as you say, just listening and allowing that person that time to speak. And as an employer as well, I think if employees feel that their boss has actually given them time to listen and understand them, that can only be a good thing as well. So, all right, I think that's interesting. And any last tips before we sort of wrap up there, Charlotte? So.
I think listening is something that we shouldn't presume that we just know how to do. It is an active practice. It's something that you really have to devote and commit to, especially in situations that may be quite difficult, whether that's appraisals or giving feedback, where we know that actually our discomfort makes us want to rush through a conversation.
And sometimes when the listener is more of a direct person and the person who's speaking is a lot more fluffy and likes to say a lot of words, it can be harder to listen. I sort of think back to when my 9-year-old daughter is talking to me. 8-year-old daughter, and she likes to go around the houses before she gets to the point, and it's you do find yourself tuning out sometimes. So,
and even if like you said, having the self-awareness, sometimes I tune out. Listening to yourself is also something I think we forget how to do, although we're not necessarily taught. Listening, as cliched as it sounds, listening begins with you. If you can't listen to yourself, you're probably not going to be able to listen to other people particularly well. That's
a very good point. Listening begins with you. I like that's a good note to end it on, Charlotte. Well, thank you very much for joining me again, Charlotte Braithwaite, psychotherapist and coach. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Tim.